ClueCon Weekly, the Free Switch community's official web show. Tune in every week for updates of the Free Switch project, interesting presentations, and interact with members of the Free Switch community. ClueCon Weekly is brought to you by Free Switch Solutions, the officially endorsed consulting firm of the Free Switch project. Free Switch Solutions solves problems so you can focus on your business. Visit freeswitch.com for more information. The ClueCon WebRTC and Telephony Developers Conference. ClueCon is held every August in the Windy City, Chicago, Illinois. Meet the developers of all your favorite open source telephony projects, make the connections you need to meet your business goals, and see the latest and greatest technology in WebRTC and telephony. Visit ClueCon.com for more details.
All right, guys. Welcome to ClueCon Weekly. Today is July the 13th, and we'll have Rich Garboski of eTech TV joining us shortly. Before we get to that, you guys know ClueCon is coming up. The hotel reservations, you need to get those in like now. You're pretty much out of time for that. Once the 15th passes, you will not be able, or you will have difficulty getting a room at the hotel and getting in on the group rate. So you need to get those in today. If you haven't registered for ClueCon, move on over to ClueCon.com and get your registration in. Up next, we have Kathleen, and I think she's got a week in review and some other news for us.
I do. This week in the code, William King added native support for a FlowRoute SMS API over HTTP or HTTPS. So that's kind of cool. Go check that out. For those of you that like to play with APIs, that's a cool thing to go and test and see what you can do with. Just a reminder, the bug hunt has moved to Tuesday, so be sure to mark your calendars for that. It is Tuesday at 2 p.m. Central Time, right here in 888. You can join Ken Rice and Italo Rossi and a bunch of other people as they kind of work through the code. You can ask questions and just hang out. ClueCon. We have some fun upcoming announcements. We have the Coder Games, which are awesome. We've got a lot of cool new stuff this year with IoT elements, so make sure to register and RSVP for that. We have a new party on Wednesday, the Telnex After Party. So when you register for ClueCon, again, RSVP to that to make sure you get a spot on the bus so you can head over and join us for the fun and games. And then we have a preliminary schedule posted on the ClueCon website, as well as a list of the speakers. So go over, check that out, see who's speaking. We've got a lot of great people coming this year. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us on social media or email us directly at marketing@cluecon.com. And we can help you out, get that sorted. And I think that's it for me, Ken.
All right, cool. Thank you very much, Kathleen. Also, guys, don't forget, if you're coming to ClueCon and you want to get into the Hardware Maker Challenge, go on over to ClueCon.com, hit the register button, and there is a spot there for you to sign up for the Maker Challenge and sign your teams up. There's also a spot there for you to sign up your API Challenge teams. I think we've got somewhere between 8 and 10 sponsor APIs this year. I believe that's right. Kathleen, correct me if I'm wrong there, where you can use these APIs to build things. William King will be running a hardware course where you can come in, play with things like Raspberry Pis and stuff like that, and build IoT devices. Mix that with the 3D printer vendors that'll be there, and who knows what you can make at ClueCon this year with the hackathon that starts on Monday. So get in there and get registered for that today. All right. Now up next, we've got Mr. Rich Garboski. Rich is based out of the New York area, and from talking to Rich, I can tell you he's been around the business for quite a while. How you doing today, Rich?
Hi, good afternoon, Ken. Things are doing well here in New York City, and thanks for having me on your show today.
Thanks for joining us. So, what can you tell? Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and let our viewers know a little bit more about you?
Well, me, I've been basically a tech person my entire life. It all started for me when I was a teenager, and I got involved with ham radio, amateur radio. So I started building my own radio station and had transmitters and receivers and basically antenna farm. And that's where I started to get interested in electronics. And I went on to start to becoming educated in electronics, taking industrial electronics in a vocational school, and worked in a wide variety of fields, technical fields, since the late 70s. So basically, I really feel I'm a product of the technology revolution, and I've watched so many different industries grow and also participated in them. And one of the industries that I spent most of my time in was in telecommunications. One of my first jobs when I was in my early 20s was I worked at a company called Telecommunications. I was working in tech support, supporting implementations of electronic key telephone systems, and later on with PBXs. And back then, telephones were a lot different. We were just coming off what we call the 1A2 key telephone system there. If anybody saw one of these phones, it was a big rotary dial phone, and it had buttons with lights under them. But the fact of the matter is they were all connected with these cables that were 50 wires in each cable. Can you imagine running those through your walls? So what electronic key did back in those days was it cut it down from 50 cables down to just four or six. So that was a big change in the industry. And also what happened during that time frame was the Bell system broke up, right? We had one company, the Bell system. They basically controlled the entire industry, and through divestiture and the bankruptcy, basically they were broken up into 8 individual Bell operating companies. And I was in the field supporting each one of those companies as they broke up. So that's when really technology and a lot of innovation started happening in those industries. We started seeing things like caller ID and voicemail, and of course electronic key systems with a limited amount of wiring. But back then the telephone network was really different from your data network, which at the time was basically minis and mainframes. So I spent a lot of time in the 80s doing that, and I also spent some time in data communications. Now this was connecting companies together long before the internet. So if you had a company that had offices in New York City and Chicago and LA, instead of having to use the switch telephone network for intercompany communications, we basically ran point-to-point T1s between these different corporate locations and used time division multiplexers and statistical multiplexers to basically converge data just in a way like we're doing today with SIP. So spent a lot of time in that area, and also spent some time here in New York City implementing Wall Street trading floors. So that was a lot happening in that era. So I lived through this whole telecom revolution of the 80s, which eventually turned into voice over IP, then to SIP, and now to WebRTC. But also at the same time, what was happening was what was going on in the PC and local area network industry. And that's where we went from operating systems as old as Novell NetWare, which is taking a group of DOS-compatible PCs and networking them together so people can share information at a quarter of the price of a mini or mainframe at the time. And also I was spending some time working with some of the X operating systems, which, if anybody remembers, SCO Xenix, spent some time implementing systems on that platform. So I've spent a wide gamut of range in a lot of different industries, and eventually going off and branching off as a consultant to business and industry to help people take advantage of all this technology. In the 1990s, I started my television show. It was originally called Technology Update, because at the time, so many people didn't really understand how all this technology worked. The PC was coming around, people didn't know how to use it. So I said, why not do a talk show and have Microsoft on and these different people on to talk about technology and in a way educate it. So the show ran from 1995 to 1999. I won 3 awards for the show. I won an award for Best Educational Series, Best Technical Effects, and Best Editing. And one thing that was really interesting we were doing back in the 90s, I tell the story now, and I still have clips of it up on my site, was we were actually live on the air on cable television, while at the same time I was doing a dial-up connection while we were live, holding a video conference. And we actually used that, and it worked, and it worked well. So I ended this series in 1999. My last show was really, I think, my best one in the series, and that was with the co-founders of TCP/IP. I managed to reach out to Dr. Vinton Cerf and Dr. Robert Kahn, and we talked about how the internet evolved from 1975 to 1995, which there was a tremendous amount of growth. There was an honor meeting these 2 guys, and since then I've talked to a lot of their colleagues and interviewed them as well. So we moved on to New York City and maintained an edge in the consulting world, but after over a decade, we are now bringing back my Tech Talk Show with all this great technology we have. We're bringing eTech TV back on the air, and we've actually taped some shows already, but we're going to continue to go into full production in the next 2 quarters. So you're going to see in July, you're going to see an interview I did 2 weeks ago with Dr. Henning Schultstrein. He's the ex-Chief Technology Officer of the FCC. He's also one of the co-authors of the SIP protocol, and he worked on RTP, and actually runs the Internet Engineering Task Force Lab at Columbia University, where it really is the test bed for deploying new technology as they come out. So it was really interesting to spend some time up at Columbia talking to Henning about how SIP has evolved and where he thinks things are going in the past and in the future, and also what's happening in the mobile space, which we can't forget as well. So you're going to see the Henning Schultstrein show coming up on our site. We also recently did a show at Streaming Media East where we covered streaming media technology. And so we're going to be continuing to shoot more shows. And hey, we really hope we want to get out to ClueCon and get to talk to you folks on what's going out there as well. So that's what the show is going to be about. We're going to have a couple companion websites that coincide with the TV series. We're going to have eTech Mall, which is really going to be a technology shopping mall for products or services. And by supporting sales in the mall, you're going to be helping support the show as well. So that's a brief overview about me and where we're going with eTech TV.
Well, cool. That's actually a lot of stuff there over the years. So I could tell you myself, like you said, we've seen a sea of change since back in the days of NetWare 2 and NetWare 3, and things like dedicated and non-dedicated server, and just IPX networking to what we have today with IP networking and the those kind of things. It's night and day. And you mentioned to me earlier about doing the dial-up conferencing using the old CUCME protocol, and I had forgot about that thing, but it was there many years ago. But these days, outside of eTech TV, I know you're working some in the SIP arena and in the WebRTC arena. What kind of deployments are you seeing these days up in your end of the country?
Well, I tell you, what's happening is we're finally starting to make the transition. And I was talking to Dr. Schultstrein last week about this whole transition from really copper, right? I mean, there are still people in this day and age. You would think that I've been deploying SIP since 2004. That's when I really started saying this is going to be major. Just like I saw local area networking in the 80s. SIP is now becoming very solid, and people are starting to trust it and move over it. But we still have a good segment of business and industry that still really count on those PRIs. So what we're finding is people are now starting to replace those PRIs with SIP trunks, which brings not a host of problems, but having to, when you're dealing with implementing things, one of the areas that I'm heavily involved with now and have been for the last 12 years is session border controllers. What is a session border controller? The role of a session border controller is to sit on the edge of your network between your internal PBX and your internet, and it actually does a lot of the work that it takes the load off the PBX. In what way? One is you will always find that the SIP standard is very loose in a way where you could have 10 SIP trunking providers implement the SIP protocol differently. So there's going to be interrupt issues between your trunking provider and your PBX, and it puts a lot of challenge up to the PBX provider because they have to react to these things all the time. So that SBC sits in between the PBX and the SIP trunking provider, allows the PBX to do its thing. It just talks to the SBC, and the SBC manages any of the interop issues between the various SIP trunking providers. So, for example, came off a couple of very, very huge enterprise projects. One was in Texas about a year ago, where we took a Cisco call manager with 1,000 users and replaced their internal Cisco Unity voicemail with cloud-based voicemail. So basically, the call would come in, and if the call required to go to voicemail, it would go back out to the internet, out to Office 365 in the cloud. Now, basically, the SBC managed, the codec negotiation, all the things that go on between the call manager and the SIP trunking provider, but it's also a fully encrypted connection, and that today is working. So that project was completed about a year ago. We're actually working on another one in Texas as well. Now, I've also worked in the open source arena. Same situation. I have an interesting client that has 60, 70 phones in India, and his PBX is in Virginia, and he only has 2 extensions in the U.S. One is in my office, and one is in the CEO's office. And he's doing that with no plain internet. And he's been running since 2009 or 2010. And it's handling remote registration of these telephones and dealing with, again, having these phones spread out throughout the planet, which is a real advantage of SIP, right? We can have a phone anywhere in the world and it'll work. So yes, I've been spending a lot of time dealing strictly with the SBCs, and with that, I get to work with as many as 40 different PBXs. I've actually had some implementations using the open source stuff, and I'm very much an open source advocate. I much believe in the open SIP standard, where everything is open and phones and trunks are not proprietary. So that gives you an idea of what I'm doing in the area of SIP trunking.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so there's, as you mentioned, there's just been a huge amount of transition going to that from where, 5 and 10 years ago, the LECs were, some of the smaller LECs would say, I don't want that SIP stuff in my network, until now we just saw, last week, week before last, CenturyLink talking about they want to cut off their copper network completely. So what are they going to replace this with? They're going to replace it with SIP. That's where they're already moving to, SIP and wireless. So as part of this big transition, we're not just seeing a transition onto SIP, but we're seeing a transition into more WebRTC stuff, ORTC-based communication straight out of the browser. What's your thoughts on that, Rich?
Well, I tell you, I think, I really think this is big. This is huge. I think this WebRTC is huge, and you would think, SIP, the SIP as a protocol itself, it had to do kind of things in 2 phases. You had your signaling to help establish a connection, then you had to deal with the audio streams, right? And WebRTC is doing things a little bit differently, and I'm just starting to get a taste of that. But here's the thing. First of all, I think, are we going to reach a day where are we even going to need a telephone? People are talking about that. Now, the people making phones may not want to think that's a good idea, but why wouldn't we have a PC with a 12-core processor that could handle being a PC and browsing and doing emailing at the same time, being able to keep up with the demands of a WebRTC session? I think those days could be there. We could have one device that's just everything, right? You just plug a headset in, you're ready to go. Now, one of the challenges that comes up with WebRTC that I find very interesting, that I'm facing deploying SBCs is, that's great if you have a bunch of dispersed people with a browser using a conference server. One of the things I'm starting to get involved with, and I'm seeing is, okay, now if your SBC can support WebRTC, now you can work all that WebRTC functionality into a PBX environment. That's when it becomes really really cool. So I think we're seeing it. Look, we're sitting here talking on a web conference right now, and we're in a multicast with about 5, 6, 7 people in here, and to me, it's only going to get better. I'm watching what's happening in the industry. Obviously, you have, what Microsoft's doing with their collaboration, and people are getting involved with different collaboration. But the one thing I do like about WebRTC, it's being open, and I'd like to see more browser support. I'd like to see the Microsoft. We were talking a little bit about Edge a little bit earlier. And get Firefox so that it's just not about Chrome. I want to see it compatible to all the web browser platforms.
Yeah, I think we're going to keep seeing that. Just to reiterate that on the browser cross compatibility. Safari and Firefox are working really good right now, and then you've got Edge coming up quickly. They're doing ORTC, which is compatible with WebRTC, but it's just a different API implementation. So, and they're already working with guys like the Adapter.js crowd that help keep a standard API for web devs across, Chrome, Firefox, and here in the near future, Edge. I think the only holdup here is what's Apple going to do with WebRTC. People are already implementing it on the iPhone, but what are they going to do in the near future where they need to do something there?
Yeah, that's what you have to look at, what they're doing in their quote-unquote FaceTime environment. And I see this, and sometimes it angers me that, all these different companies want to create their own, I call them their own islands of communication, where, okay, if you're on the, iPhone platform, this is what we do. And then if you're on, the Microsoft platform with their acquisition of Skype, and you got to be in this platform, and to me, I'm all for openness. Cross-platform compatibility across the board, and that's one of the things that really attracted me about WebRTC.
Yeah, I think the whole walled garden thing needs to kind of go away because that seems to where we're kind of going. It's kind of like the early days of Bell before AT&T swept the country. And you had, little Bell operators around, so you can make calls in your own local town, but not necessarily from New York to LA. And we started to see, some convergence in that a few years back with XMPP and seeing where Google could talk to AIM and that kind of thing, but we're kind of losing that ability right now, I think.
You are now muted.
Well, I've seen it, and I see it from the perspective of the consulting. And again, you look at what Cisco does with their phones. They have they call it the skinny protocol, right? And I dealt with this back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, it was like you had if you had a Nitsuko or if you had a Thai phone, that Thai phone worked with a Thai key system, and that was it. You had to buy the KSU, and you had to buy the phones, and they had the mats, and that was it. And then if you had NEC or another manufacturer, they had their platforms. And then this is what SIP was supposed to improve, was not to have to match the phone to the platform. And we saw that kind of go open. I could talk to different people. I say, well, okay, I could provide you this PBX, and you can buy these phones, and there's some tightness in the integration, but do you want that type of solution, or do you want a type of solution that if you make an investment in phones, these phones are open SIP, and if you get rid of that PBX, you can just use these phones again. 9 times out of 10, they like the open SIP approach. And then, yes, I'm seeing people kind of go back to all of them, go back to putting 1 or 2 features in that kind of make it unique. And, is that going to really help drive WebRTC? Because people are used to browsers. They know if I have a browser and a headset and an app that's running, do I need to even worry about the phone anymore?
Yeah, I mean, and we're really getting to that. And I mean, you mentioned something earlier about do we still need phones? But I would ask you what you think about this. Is this still really a phone? I mean, this is just an iPhone 6, but is this really a phone, or is this just a computer running an app to make it act like a phone?
Well, exactly. And here's my take: do we need phone numbers anymore? I was, because I was involved with SIP in the early 2000s. Why did we have a telephone number? We had a telephone number so that it started with the bell system, right? I would pick up the phone, I'd get dial tone, I'd start dialing digits. Based upon that sequence of digits, area codes, exchanges, the central offices that connected point A to point B would know how to quote unquote kind of route the call, right? Then all of a sudden, when the bells broke up, they figured out how to interoperate. But with the internet, why do we even need a phone number? And this is when, if you remember the enum technology, right?
Oh, yes. I know where you're going here.
Right?
Go ahead.
You remember enum technology? You have to explain to people, it's like, the reason why we have telephone numbers today was first of all to sell local and long distance, right? It was about selling long distance in the 80s and 90s. But why can't we just have our email address serve everything? So in our DNS record, we have our email, we have where our website is, where our email server is, and then what our SIP address is, right? And enum allowed a transition so that if somebody didn't have SIP, so in other words, if you have a SIP address and I have a SIP address, why can't we just establish a session directly between us, right? But if somebody didn't have a SIP address, that's where enum allowed the PSTN and the phone number to take over. So I think we could reach a day where we don't even need a phone number anymore. We could just use our SIP address for everything, including WebRTC.
What do you think the baby bells are going to let us get away with doing that? I mean, you saw what they did with I'm going to assume you kind of saw what they did with CC1 enum a few years back, where it looked like it was going to go good. But then they closed it off to the world. So now there's virtually no North American enum, proper IANA-backed, country code 1 enum registry. And that's because, they didn't want us to talk directly to each other. They want to stay in the middle of that communication.
Well, it's like, I remember, if you remember back in the 80s, right? If you remember the bells, I remember they had that black phone. You could throw that black phone off a building 5 stories and it would not break when it hit the ground. And they when you're a monopoly, you really don't have to innovate. You could just keep making the same phones, and we didn't have anything. I remember here's a good trivia question. What were the 8 companies that the bells broke up into, right? And if you look, in many ways, they've all really just recombined. We had Bell Atlantic, Bell South, Pactel, Ameritech, US West, Sonicor was up in New England, and 9X, right? I think I got most of them, right? What do we have now?
Bell Atlantic. Yeah, we're back down to Verizon, which was what? Bell Atlantic and
9X. Yeah, Verizon was 9X, Sonicor, and probably Bell South, right? They were in the East Coast. And then what happened with US West and Ameritech was Pactel. So, yeah, they've kind of combined back together again, which is really not a good thing.
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, and they keep trying to push us, where we're still dependent on the phone number. But I like what I agree with you. Being an open source SIP guy is, why can't you just you got a keypad on your phone now, a full keyboard. Why can't you just type in ken@freeswitch.org and hit call, and it calls me? Right. We can do it in the browser, but I can't do that on my cell phone without running a special app. It's not built in, out of the box. So that would be. And that's
I think what's going to happen is it's going to be forced innovation, right? And I think we're going to see this all play out in the next 5-10 years. That again, not having phone numbers. You're right. When you send an email, it does a lookup on your DNS record and says, okay, connect to that mail server, establish a virtual session, and send a message to that mail server. There's no reason, technically, that you cannot do that with SIP or really WebRTC, right? Where it's just part of your DNS record, and if you have a SIP address and it could establish a virtual session, we don't need any middle party to connect that session. We just kind of need that proxy.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, well, I want to get back to your TV show in a few minutes, but just I want to try to get a prediction out of you. Where do you think we're going to be with this WebRTC, SIP, communications, just on the PSTN and interconnecting level between enterprise and even consumers in, let's say 5 years down the road?
Well, I'm from New York. I tend to be spoiled because we've got fiber all over the place here. When I interviewed Dr. Schultzreen, it was interesting because I was telling him the landline's gone, it's dead. We can just get rid of the PSTN. He's like, well, there's a lot of rural areas throughout the country that don't have the broadband, and they still need the copper lines to run DSL. And I'm like, yeah, you're actually kind of right. You're kind of right in that area. Where I think I'm seeing the real conversion from PRIs and copper to SIP. Now people are saying, how do I do it? And let's make the move. I think we're going to be off the PSTN, and because of the advances in wireless, I think we're going to be off within 10 years. We're going to have no copper. Everything's going to be fiber. The backbone speed's going to increase, and there's going to be more peer-to-peer communications. That we're not going to need these middle carriers, and in a way, it's being dictated by the people. People are used to using. It started with instant messaging, right? Remember when instant messaging was the big thing? You had either AIM or you had ICQ or you had Yahoo Messenger, and people got used to just going and instead of picking up the phone and calling somebody, they would say, "Oh, do I see him online? Oh, yeah, he's online." But again, you had the separate islands of communication, right? Where SIP and WebRTC can kind of make that one point instead of having it all segregated. So predictions, I think in the next 10 years, we're not going to have all the copper is going to go away. We don't need it anymore anyway. Everything's going to be going fiber bases, even as we move out to the rural areas. And the areas that don't have copper, you're going to see the improvements in wireless helping those areas, with 5G coming around and WiMAX and improvements in that area. So we won't have a need to have any copper wiring. I'll see that there. And more people are adopting, you got to remember the generations are moving. So people are just used to being on a mobile device, and they're used to just downloading apps and using apps. And really, with the WebRTC, it's just going to be another app. It's just going to be another application. Oh, I can get on WebRTC and hold a multicast conference right from my telephone. So I think with that, the improvements in speed of mobile devices with 5G coming around, I see nothing but great things happening. And as a matter of fact, on the next round, I'll tell you what's going to be going on in the next 8 weeks for our show. And I'd like to do some of the things that you're at FreeSwitch.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we just lost you there for just a second, Rich, with that last, about the last second there. Can you ask that question again?
Sure. Why don't you, before I tell you about the TV show and what's going on over the next, catch our viewers up, which this show will actually be rebroadcast over eTech TV. Tell us about some of the things that's going on with you at FreeSwitch and the pipeline as well.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, this August, from the 7th to the 12th, is ClueCon. That's the big developers conference in Chicago. So the FreeSwitch team has produced that show for this. I think this will be ClueCon, the 11th one now. So Anthony and Mike and Brian, the core team, have been working really hard on that for over a decade now, and in the past couple of years, we've expanded that team to include myself and Kathleen and a few other people like William King. So that's going to be coming up soon. We've got guys from Mozilla, guys from Microsoft, all the major open source communication players from the dev teams will be there for that. From the FreeSwitch project itself, we've been working a fair bit over the last couple of years to implement WebRTC and expand our use of WebRTC and its media handling capabilities. A perfect example of this is the video conferencing technology that we're using today. It is capable of full 1080p, 60 frame per second HD video, and switching and combining multiple streams together. In this case, we're just doing a simple 1x1, but it also supports things like stereo audio. So we can either consume and rebroadcast to the viewers stereo audio as, maybe out of a mixing board or something. Or if we have a monaural input, we can also do a virtual 3D soundstage. This is something that Tony came up with, where we'll virtually place people on the soundstage. And what this does is gives you just in your audio field a representation. And with the stereo, it actually makes it when if 2 or 3 people are talking at the same time, this has happened before on conference calls, you can't really understand what anybody's saying. But it allows both of your ears to process 2 different data streams of high quality audio, and you can really then start visualizing people in different parts of the room, and you can still understand them. So there's been a lot of work in that. Tony has also, in the past year or so, has been working with Open Computer Vision, so we can do facial recognition and face tracking on here. Not really facial recognition as like, this is Ken or this is Rich, but where am I in frame, and what scale is my head at? So we can do some of the, things like, I'm not looking at the screen, so mute me right now. Or I'm moving around, so put a funny hat on me. And that's, that's kind of a gimmicky kind of thing to do, but that just demonstrates some of the technology available within FreeSwitch. And of course, we do support Verdo, which is a protocol that Anthony Minicelli invented for doing lightweight WebRTC into FreeSwitch, and then FreeSwitch can convert that to SIP. We've also had support for SIP over WebRTC, which a lot of people have done, plus the full DTLS and ICE standards that are required for doing secure media with WebRTC. And things are continually growing and adding. Example, in the past week, William King has added full API support for FlowRoute.com's SMS over IP protocol. He's been working on SMPP, which is a native IP-based protocol for doing SMS from server to server and server to client. And we've also been expanding our packaging. And we've been working a lot lately on packaging for the Debian platform, where you don't really have to do anything. You don't have to build FreeSwitch from source. It's just there, apt-get install FreeSwitch, and poof, you have a working FreeSwitch platform. I've been working on expanding that to include Ubuntu. So we should see that out there sometime in the next month or so, production ready. And there's a lot of things going on like that. I know that there's some other things going on that I really can't talk about yet. It's a little early in the cycle. On where those are actually going to end up, that the engineering team, the core engineering team, is working on. So there'll be some really cool stuff coming down the pipe soon, and you should probably watch out for the announcements around ClueCon, because I know Tony, he usually has something really cool to show off at ClueCon. He saves it for that time of year, I think.
Fantastic. And folks, and for our viewers that are watching this on the rebroadcast, go check out the FreeSwitch site. You can see them at freeswitch.org. You can download open source code. You can install it, play with it, and there's always a whole worldwide available developers that are out there to help you implement it if you ever need it. Now, here at eTech TV, again, a lot of exciting things happening in July and August. Like I said earlier, we've got the show with Dr. Henning Schilstring. That's coming up here in July. We also have the streaming media show. The full show is going to be on in July, and we'll actually be visiting the WebRTC, a WebRTC conference here in New York in August, and we are going to try like heck to get out to Chicago, even if maybe for a day too, to come chat with all you guys out there. So you're going to want to stay tuned with eTech TV. We are actually going to be doing also some shows at one of the oldest taverns in the country. It's called Francis Tavern Museum. It's the building's been around since the 1780s, and it's where George Washington gave his farewell address after winning the Revolutionary War. And that building sits in Lower Manhattan, surrounded by a bunch of skyscrapers. And that's going to be a kickoff to what we're going to be doing at eTech TV, is the history of communications, starting from the telegraph to the telephone to the electronic switch to, of course, voice over IP to SIP to WebRTC. So we'd love to talk to you guys about some of the newer technologies that comes out. And of course, you're always welcome to appear on the show. So I want to thank you for having us here today. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, Rich, I want to thank you for coming out here today and joining us. I think your insight into some of the history and where things are going is going to be useful for our viewers here. So I know Rich, he's got to get back to his day, guys. So don't forget to join us next week. We're going to have the Telnex team from Chicago coming in and talking about some more technical things on how they've deployed FreeSwitch and how they're using that in their carrier-grade network. So that'll be right back here on Wednesday the 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And don't forget, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and for you guys watching us on YouTube, click the subscribe button right below this video. Also, again, don't forget to go check out Rich over at etech.tv, and don't forget, join us at ClueCon. Get more information there at ClueCon.com, where you can see guys like Philip Hinke and Chad Hart from the WebRTC world, and you'll also see guys from the various things, Bogdan from OpenSIPs, and all the different projects. You guys join us then, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.